the caravan is carrying President-elect Trump is already heading over towards the White House, so this arrival could happen any minute now. But Vaughn, you know, this comes after such a deeply contentious campaign between the two men before the president exited the race. Here's some of what we heard from both of them just during this campaign.
Kamala Harris and Crooked Joe have driven our economy off a cliff.
I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Trump is a threat to this nation.
You know, I call him Crooked Joe. I call him Sleepy Joe. But the fact is, this man is terrible.
Donald Trump isn't just a convicted criminal. He's a one-man crime wave.
We talk about Biden like he's a feeble old guy, and he is.
There's one more thing Trump and his Republican friends want to do. They want another giant tax cut for the wealthy. These are the kind of guys you like to smack in the ass.
And we know that Trump did not extend the invitation to Biden back in 2020. What does Trump want out of this meeting?
Of course, 4 years ago, Donald Trump was still trying to overturn his 2020 election defeat, and he didn't even end up going to the inauguration of Joe Biden on January 20th. 2021. For this meeting, so much of this is about imagery, of course, for Donald Trump. But let's be clear, the president-elect has been dismissive of Joe Biden's capacity to be serving in the White House. And he consistently has made the case that he already has his own diplomatic relations with foreign leaders. Of course, he has had more than 20 phone calls so far with various leaders. And for him, he chose to not go and receive the daily intelligence briefings during the course of his last several months as a general election nominee, despite them being made available to him, because he said that he did not want to be accused of leaking any information. So I think the question here is, to what extent does the president-elect actually show deference to the exiting president, Joe Biden, about serious national security measures? Of course, when Donald Trump took the Oval Office 8 years ago from President Obama at the time, they had conversations about North Korea and the threats that face the United States, not only foreign threats, but also domestic threats. And so from the Trump side of this, it's a question as to what extent does he have interest in what President Biden may seek to share about intelligence that is perhaps classified and not made publicly available, and classified information that has not made its way to Donald Trump yet because he has chosen not to have intelligence briefings. Of course, Donald Trump has suggested that he would seek to fire the top military generals under the Biden administration, as well as potentially career DOJ officials. So overwhelmingly publicly, Donald Trump has been very dismissive of the leadership, the existing leadership that would at least be slated to stay on in their capacities come January 20th, 2025. Yet it'll be bearing out today the extent to which he actually seeks the advice of President Biden on top of issues of concern, but also personnel who he may seek to keep on in certain capacities.
And Gabe, I understand that even though the White House on a regular day is filled with journalists, today there is a number of cameras that normally we don't see there.
Yeah, Jose, that is quite the understatement. Just to set the scene for you a little bit, I'm standing here in front of the West Wing. If we can pan the camera right over here and see just how many reporters have assembled for this, really the press corps from all around the world. This is in addition to the cameras that are normally here on the White House North Lawn, anticipating the president-elect here at the White House. Again, we do not have any indication that he would speak after this Oval Office meeting, but this is something that many reporters from around the world, from different countries, to see, what the president-elect, anything he could say about incoming policy. Again, with so much going on around the world, in the Middle East and in Ukraine, there is such high interest here. This, of course, the first meeting between President-elect Trump and the outgoing President Biden. Jose.
Jen, you served in this White House and others. How important is this? I'm just thinking, what are you thinking today as we're going to be witnessing something that is so important for the message of what the United States is and what the democracy, the democratic process in the United States really is?
Well, look, I think today is an important moment. I warn everyone not to overread into what anyone's vibes are coming out of this meeting, because I would be surprised if there are fireworks out of this. 8 years ago, I was the communications director for President Obama when then President-elect Trump came. He actually came 2 days after the election last time, or 8 years ago, because that was the plan that we had Hillary Clinton won. They had a meeting, as you noted, that was 90 minutes, where they discussed everything from, and Vaughn talked about this a little bit, the Affordable Care Act, and President Obama made the case for why to continue it. The Iran nuclear deal also made the case. He kind of came out of that meeting feeling like it went well. We know what history tells us in terms of what happened, or what the attempts were in terms of what happened to the Affordable Care Act and what happened to the Iran nuclear deal. It is very important because through every single presidency for hundreds of years, from Democrats to Republicans, from Republicans to Democrats, this meeting, the transition of power, the extension of an olive branch even to rivals is what has happened. And the reason President Obama handled it then, even though he did not want Trump to be elected, is because of how the Bush team handled it when President Obama came in. With grace, they extended an olive branch to all of us. They invited us in as a staff level to inform us and teach us things like, what do you do when Marine One lands? What do you do in all sorts of protocols of the White House you don't know unless you've worked there? So important, but I think we've also learned a lot since 8 years ago. So it's important to watch, important to see the continuity of this. But I also think we should take everything with a skeptical eye in terms of what's said coming out of this meeting, in terms of what policies will continue or not, because we'll see when he's president.
Yeah, Jen, I mean, I was just thinking of the many times that, then President Obama, in off the records that he would have with many of us, would talk about the biggest concerns that the United States was facing. And I remember over and over again, among the many issues that he brought up, and this is just because you've mentioned it and others have mentioned. I mean, President Obama was very keenly aware of the threats of the North Korean dictatorship and how unstable that regime is in so many ways. And so the opportunity to sit with the president-elect and tell him about the real dangers that only the president of the United States has a complete grasp on, it's like, if this isn't part of their conversation, of those 90 minutes that Obama had with Trump, if this isn't part of the conversation, it just seems like it would be a waste.
I'm sure I assume it would be, and I assume it would be on the agenda, as any national security issue would be. I'd also note that this is typically not the only time that sitting presidents talk to their predecessors. It is significant because it's in person and it shows a transfer of power, whether it's with the same party or not the same party. And that's important. Even with Obama and Bush, because it was during the financial crisis, they had been talking and meeting, and there had been lots of discussions on a staff level. That's what tells you more than anything else. And 4 years ago, when I was working for President Biden, actually 8 years ago when I was working for President Obama, there was not a lot of follow-up or desire for additional information, for all of the briefing books that were prepared, for all of the, institutional knowledge and knowledge about policy issues and where things stood that we anticipated. Maybe now will be different. We will see. At the same time, 4 years ago, there wasn't a sharing of that information. So that's important recent history to also digest and be aware of as we go into this moment. Maybe it will be different. Hopefully it will be different. But we have to be clear-eyed about that and also talk about that in the context of what we're seeing today.
Indeed. And so, Mark, how do you see this point in time?
I actually see it very similar to Jen. I think that whether or not there's as much substantive conversation, I think the optics are incredibly important, that there won't be the same antics of 4 years ago, that there is going to be a peaceful transfer of power. I think Joe Biden is an institutionalist. Whether we as Republicans disagree with his policies, he's an institutionalist who wants to ensure that. I doubt it's 90 minutes because, as Jen said, 8 years ago, this was all new for the Trump team, whereas they've now have been in the White House for 4 years previously, and so there's probably less of an introduction. I would imagine that there's probably going to be some conversation about Ukraine, and that the President Biden will want to share whatever latest intelligence is. But I think at the same time, there's going to be a lot of skepticism on the Trump team about intelligence because of the way things went 8 years ago in that transition with Jim Comey coming to the president and promising him that he was not a subject of investigation that he was. And so I'm not sure how much substantive will come out of it, but I still think the optics are incredibly important, not just for the American people, but for the world to see.
Yeah, and right now the president is meeting with the president-elect. Apparently, they just had their spray moment, the moment when the media is brought in. They spoke for about a minute, and we're going to, of course, now turn that around for you and bring it to you as soon as we get it. But they are currently meeting. The president and the president-elect spoke publicly for about a minute. And so, Gabe, that is now being turned around.
Yeah, Jose, this is, for those watching at home, it's what's called the pool spray, when the pool of reporters is brought into the Oval Office, and it takes a video of the event, and it doesn't happen live. We have to play it out now. However, we are getting notes from some of those reporters inside the Oval Office. We're told that President Biden spoke first, and then he called for a smooth transition of power. President-elect Trump then spoke, saying politics is tough, and said the transition will be smooth. They did not take questions, and as you said, Jose, it was very quick pool spray, and we're waiting for that video to be played out. I'm standing right here in front of the West Wing. Still no indication how long this meeting with the president-elect and President Biden will last, but we'll be watching along with you, Jose.
Yeah, and as we await that, and as soon as we get it, we will, of course, bring it to you. But I want to kind of bring up something to Mark. Musk is accompanying Trump on his plane flight to D.C. this morning. NBC News is new reporting that Musk may already be overstaying his welcome. What does this tell you about how different Trump's second administration will be than his first?
Well, I think there's kind of two questions there. I think that Elon Musk was incredibly helpful to the election this cycle, not just for Donald Trump, but for Republicans up and down the ballot as far as funding much of the get out the vote effort that I think the RNC was incapable of doing. And so I think that he deserves a lot of credit for that, and probably is welcomed by both House and Senate as well. As far as the second Trump administration, I do think that there has been a change in policy. I think that the first administration had a lot of conservative victories, but there's no doubt that the rhetoric and tone of where the administration, or I should say the campaign, went was far more in a populist direction, whether or not that is related to Ukraine or on trade or on social issues. And so there's been a very large turn away from conservatism throughout this campaign. And I think the question will be, as he staffs it up, the initial, I think, picks have been comforting to conservatives. We'll see if that continues.
And Vaughn, we're also learning this morning, and we're just commenting on that, former First Lady Melania Trump will not join President-elect Trump at the White House meeting with First Lady Joe Biden. Do we know why?
It is not clear exactly why. Melania Trump is somebody who has been very private over the course of the last several years since leaving the White House about the role that she would not only play during his campaign. We saw her on very few occasions when they went to go vote at the Republican National Convention. Of course, on election night, we saw her as well. But she has been very close with Barron Trump, who is now attending college. It is not clear the extent to which she intends to play a role in this second administration. She obfuscated multiple times when asked about what type of a president she would have in a second Trump White House. In a social media post here just a bit ago this morning, she